3 months ago, my brother was ordered to go to the Arctic to establish a new scientific research station. At first, everything went smoothly. The Arctic Scientific Research Station named Kunpeng was well organized from site selection to construction, until 2 weeks ago. The main station suddenly received a message. "Run away, don't come down." The main station immediately asked for details. However, after 24 hours, there was still no reply from the Kunpeng station, and all the scientific research members in the station were out of contact. For safety reasons, the main station immediately asked the neighboring scientific research station to send people to check. When the members of the neighboring station went there, they only found an empty camp. In the center of the camp, there is a strange ice cave with a diameter of about 2 meters. It is bottomless and strangely emits a fishy airflow. At the same time, the radio station in the camp intermittently broadcasts strange messages. The ice layer is breathing, the giant bird turns into a big fish, and the magma grows a bronze city. Judging from the tone, it is undoubtedly my brother Shanglu. After a preliminary inspection, the daily necessities and daily clothes of each member in the camp were all there, and there was no missing transportation equipment. The only thing missing was the diving equipment. The people and diving equipment were gone, which naturally reminded people of the ice cave in the camp. Moreover, the last message sent by the Kunpeng station, "Run away, don't come down, don't come down," where to go? In this Arctic, there is nothing but icebergs and the sea, and the answer is self-evident. Soon, the unmanned diving robot fell into the ice cave, but soon after, the equipment lost the signal. In desperation, 2 scientific expedition members from the neighboring station decided to dive into the ice cave to find out. But who knew that there would be an accident when they went there? 2 people, only one came back. The one who came back became mentally ill after landing, and the whole person fell into a state of madness. Seeing that the situation was serious, the superiors decided to call a special exploration team to go to the Arctic for exploration and rescue. Because of my rich exploration experience and my brother's relationship, I was selected to be a member of the exploration team. As soon as I received the notice, I went to the mental hospital. The survivors who escaped from the ice cave were sent back to China today and are receiving treatment. Just at the door of the ward, I met Professor Zhang. Professor Zhang is not only a marine biologist, but also my brother Shanglu's teacher and a member of the newly formed exploration team. Before this, we had a lot of contact. I nodded and said in a deep voice, "Professor Zhang, how is Wang Dao?" Wang Dao is the name of the survivor. Professor Zhang looked at the closed ward and shook his head. He was very shocked and couldn't ask anything. I was slightly restrained. "Is it convenient to visit now?" Professor Zhang hesitated and finally nodded. After entering the ward, a very special smell came to my face, similar to a mixture of fishy smell and osmanthus fragrance. The source of the smell was the shivering figure covered in the quilt on the bed. I looked at Professor Zhang, who seemed to guess my doubts and explained the reason. It turned out that when Wang Dao came out of the ice cave, his body was covered with a strange mucus. The smell I smelled was the residue of that mucus. As for the composition of the mucus, it was initially determined to be the excrement of an unknown creature. My eyes fixed. Unknown creature, yes. Bang. At this moment, Wang Dao suddenly fell off the bed and his body began to twitch nonstop. "It's so cold, hot." I hurried over, and the moment my hand touched him, I immediately retracted it. "It's so hot." Wang Dao's whole body was red, his body temperature was terribly high, and he was constantly emitting white steam. This can no longer be described as hot, but in less than a moment, his body temperature dropped visibly, white frost began to condense on his body's surface, and his eyes became clear. I don't know what he thought of. Wang Dao's eyes were wide open, and fear almost overflowed. Finally, he uttered a few words with difficulty. There is. What is it?" I leaned over and listened carefully. But before he could answer, Wang Dao suddenly bent his body and vomited a ball of fishy yellow oil. Then his body stiffened and there was no movement. Professor Zhang, who had gone to call the doctor, came and saw this scene, and his pupils shrank suddenly. He hurriedly approached and stared at the vomit. It looks like it. Professor Zhang was excited, took out the rubber gloves he carried with him, and carefully put the vomit into a sealed bag. "What does it look like?" I asked on the side. Professor Zhang was still immersed in a certain joy, and I helplessly shouted again, "Professor Zhang!" "Ah!" Professor Zhang swallowed his saliva and said excitedly, "Yishang, let me go back and test it first, and I will tell you in detail when the results come out." Before I could reply, he walked out of the hospital quickly. 2 days later, our 7-member exploration team boarded the icebreaker to the North Pole. In addition to Professor Zhang and me, there were 4 special commissioners with great skills to protect our safety. Finally, there was Lao Dao, my clerk in the antique shop. Shortly after boarding the ship, Professor Zhang knocked on my door. He looked much more energetic after only a few days of not seeing him. This trip to the Arctic will definitely go down in history. Looking at Professor Zhang, whose face was flushed, I tried to ask, "It's that thing." Professor Zhang nodded and said mysteriously, "Do you know what Zhuangzi described about Kunpeng in Xiaoyu?" "I know that." I couldn't help but hesitate, but is this related to that vomit-fishy butter-like substance? The beginning of Daoyu says, there is a fish in the North Sea. Its name is Kun. Professor Zhang smiled meaningfully. Your family is well educated. Where do you think this North Sea refers to? The North Sea is the North Sea. I fell into deep thought. In the documents of various dynasties, the records of the North Sea are different. Some say Bahai Sea, some say Lake Baikal, and some say the North Sea in Beijing. Wait, there is also the far North Sea. I suddenly had an idea and blurted out, "Professor, you mean the Arctic Ocean?" "Yes," Professor Zhang said solemnly. "What is in Xiaoyu is true. There are big fish under the North Pole. Everything can prove it. In your brother's message, there is a sentence the giant bird turned into a big fish, which is Kunpeng." He became more and more excited. His face flushed. The lost scientific expedition team must have encountered that legendary creature. I found it unbelievable, but does that creature really exist in reality? Yes. It must exist. Professor Zhang took out the test report and explained. What Wang Dao vomited was a piece of fat. The energy contained in it is nearly 100 times that of the same volume of whale blubber. Only the fat of that kind of behemoth can have such high energy. I couldn't help but wonder, "Professor, are you so sure?" Professor Zhang took out a file bag, put it on the table, and said word by word, 10 years ago, I saw it. Have you seen Kunpeng? I was shocked and asked in surprise, can it really change between Kun and Peng? This kind of creature is not scientific at all. I don't know about that, Professor Zhang said regretfully. I just saw it from a distance in the sea. Then he told about his experience that year. 10 years ago, Professor Zhang was studying Arctic creatures and found a trapped Arctic right whale under the ice. The situation was urgent at the time, and the scientific expedition team decided to break the ice. However, just when the ice was about to break, a huge shadow suddenly appeared in the deep sea under the ice. Standing on the ice, I feel so insignificant as a human being, which is unprecedented. Speaking of this, Professor Zhang said with lingering fear, the Arctic right whale weighing tens of tons was directly sucked away by some terrifying suction. It disappeared in just a moment. I pondered for a moment and said my guess, could it be a giant blue whale? No way. Professor Zhang took out the yellowed test report from the file bag. This is what I bravely collected with a catapult harpoon at the time. I took it and looked at it carefully, and then compared the report on the fishy and yellowish substance. It's exactly the same. How is it? Professor Zhang looked complacent. I tried to calm myself down. According to the existing information, it can only be preliminarily judged that it may be a giant marine creature or a dense school of fish. Hearing this, Professor Zhang snorted coldly and turned away. You will understand when you get to the Arctic. Looking at his back as he left, my face darkened. As a scientific researcher, Professor Zhang is also well known for his rigor in the industry, and the information just now is obviously not convincing. But why is he so sure? Is he hiding something? Boss, do you need me to pry open his mouth? A tower-like figure appeared at the door. No need. I waved my hand and said, Lao Dao, you should adjust your condition during this period. It may be a tough battle when the time comes. Understood. Lao Dao did not hesitate and retreated directly. I took out a notebook from the inner pocket of my chest and made a mark on John Songtao's name. In this notebook, I sorted out all the clues of this incident. After scanning it, my eyes stayed on a sentence. The ice layer is breathing, the giant bird turns into a big fish, and the magma grows a bronze city. That is the only clue left by my brother. Others may be confused and even think it is crazy, but when I know this information, I can't help trembling all over. It's not fear, nor sadness, but excitement from the bottom of my heart. Because this is the information my brother specially conveyed to me. I looked up at the sky and murmured, "Hundreds of generations of our family have been chasing after thousands of years, and finally the truth is about to be revealed." After more than half a month of travel, we successfully arrived at the North Pole. After the scientific expedition, members from the neighboring station came to the Kunpeng station to search. Everything was kept as it was to avoid accidentally destroying the clues. The power supply system was intact, and my brother's strange message was repeatedly played by the radio station. A faint fishy smell permeated the entire camp. The source of the smell was the terrifying ice cave with a diameter of nearly 2 meters in the center of the camp. Standing on the edge and looking down, it was pitch black. Two specialists in the team took the lead and dived with underwater cameras. We stared at the real-time images sent back. Professor Zhang used the communication equipment to ask, "Are there any traces of organisms?" "No at the moment." As we continued to dive, the light became dimmer and dimmer, and only a few meters away from the headlight could be seen clearly. The sound of the microphone was all the sizzling sound of water. At this moment, I suddenly saw a few red and white shadows passing through the screen, and hurriedly said, "No. 3, the camera is pointed at your 8 o'clock position, got it." The camera direction changed, and the light followed it, but there was nothing else except the thick ice layer. "Is it gone? Yishang, did you find anything?" Professor Zhang asked. I played the video back and pressed the pause button at the right time. "Professor, take a look. What is this?" Due to the fast speed, there are only a few strips of blurred pixels in the picture, mainly red and white. Or in other words, it is a whitish blood red. Professor Zhang wiped his glasses, stared at the screen carefully, and murmured, "It's only the size of a palm. Is it some kind of shrimp?" "No." I frowned and said slowly, "Professor, look carefully. Those things are dot inside the ice layer." "Inside?" Professor Zhang immediately directed the camera to get close to the ice surface. Just as the image was gradually enlarged, the picture shook violently. Just as the water was about to stabilize, there was a sudden sound of water flow, and a bloody face was pressed tightly in front of the camera. The picture was interrupted. In the end, only the shrill screams were transmitted intermittently. "We can't go back, we are surrounded. Quick! Go over, there is a way." "No." 3 and no. 4. "Please reply if you hear me. Please reply if you hear me." Professor Zhang kept calling, but there was no response, and the traction ropes on both of them also fell off. "Lao Dao, go down and take a look." I looked at the snow screen, thinking. Lao Dao nodded silently, put on the diving equipment, and jumped into the ice cave without looking back. 10 minutes later, his voice came. "Boss, there is a hole in the ice wall nearly 60 meters underwater." "How big is the hole?" "The widest place is about 1 meter. People can go in." Hearing the answer, I immediately put on the diving suit. "Professor, I'll go down and take a look." "I'll go too," Professor Zhang said immediately. I looked at Professor Zhang's half-cut hair. "Professor, you..." "Although I'm not young anymore, I've been in the Arctic for a while, and my ice diving skills are not bad," Professor Zhang continued. "There may be creatures below, and it will be helpful for you to take me with you." Looking at his persistence, I nodded and agreed. As we continued to dive, Professor Zhang and I soon saw the cave entrance that Lao Dao mentioned, which was just enough for one person to pass through. "Boss, I'm 100 meters ahead, safe," Lao Dao's voice came from the headset. After I responded, I took Professor Zhang into the cave. The water flow in the cave was not calm, but fluctuated. Up and down. Is the ice layer breathing? I pursed my lips and walked to 100 meters, and saw Lao Dao waiting for us there. He said, "There is a huge cavity 150 meters ahead, where the signal interference is strong and the communication equipment cannot be used." I nodded, followed him to the end of the cave, and poked out of the water. As Lao Dao said, it was a huge cavity, above the horizontal plane, and the distance from the top of the cavity was almost 20 meters. Just as we were packing up the oxygen cylinders, Lao Dao, who was the first to explore the way ahead, found the diving suits of the two specialists. But the people were gone. Professor Zhang hesitated to speak. Lao Dao suddenly drew out his dagger and protected me behind him. He stared at the bottom of the diving suit. I moved down from the light, and a layer of white sweat appeared in an instant. It turned out to be 3 bloody faces. In just a moment, the 3 red and white guys disappeared at a very fast speed, as if they had never appeared. Professor Zhang rubbed his eyes. Yishang, did you see those 3 things clearly? The whole body was bloody and fleshy, and it seemed that there was no lower limbs. The body was nearly 2 meters long. I tried to recall. That's right, Professor Zhang's face flushed, and he said in a trembling voice, "It is recorded in the ancient book Dakan Wenlu that the big fish Kun would raise mermaids as his followers. The one just now should be a mermaid." Kun really exists? I looked surprised, but I was excited in my heart. It seems to be getting closer and closer. But I don't know how far my brother has reached. Wu Yunwu. Suddenly, sobbing came from the depths of the cavity. I realized that Lao Dao was exploring the way ahead and no one was seen. Seeing this, Professor Zhang and I hurriedly chased after him, but found that Lao Dao was standing stiffly in front. He was always calm, but his pupils were trembling. Professor Zhang screamed horribly and looked ahead with horror. I looked over, and the unbelievable scene hit my eyes, and a cold chill rushed straight to the top of my head. This is... There was a red and white figure in the water not far away. Red and white are not the original colors, but blurred flesh and blood. This is not a so-called mermaid at all, but a human. The human skin was peeled off, and because of the shoes on the feet, the long skin drooped on the body. In the water, from a distance, it looks like a swimming fish tail. If you look closely, you will find that the person in the water is one of the 2 commissioners who went into the water. Hot, so hot. The remaining commissioner was naked, lying on the ice. His whole body was red. When he saw us, he was like a savior, and shouted in a sad voice, "Kill me, quick!" Professor Zhang and I looked at each other, and it was obvious that this was very similar to Wang Dao's symptoms. Before we could react, the commissioner trembled all over, his hair was frosted, and he fell into the ice water with a wow. In an instant, the skin and flesh were separated. Ahem. I couldn't help coughing and gritted my teeth and said, "Those mermaids I saw before should be the missing scientific expedition members." The tragic scene just now should be caused by the large temperature difference between the inside and outside of the body. Professor Zhang frowned. But what is the reason? At this time, Lao Dao signaled with his eyes, "There is something in the water." I saw a fingernail-sized worm crawling out of the corpse in the water, and its whole body was bright crimson. I quickly made a silent gesture and pulled Professor Zhang back a few steps. After the bug left, Professor Zhang couldn't help wondering, "I've never seen this kind of bug before. Yishang, do you know it?" I explained, "I've seen it in ancient books before. This bug is called Baoyin bug. It's like red flames, but it lives in extremely cold places. It can secrete a kind of venom that burns people's flesh and blood, and their skin becomes like ice skin, and they die in pain in the end." I thought it was fabricated before, but I didn't expect it to be true. Professor Zhang sighed when he heard it. "Speaking of it, I am still studying biology, but I didn't expect I don't know as much as you do. I just read a lot of books. I was a little embarrassed. You know, my ancestors were historians, and there are many books passed down." Professor Zhang nodded and said nothing more. Then, the 3 of us continued to move forward. On the way ahead, a lot of diving equipment appeared one after another, all left by the missing scientific expedition team members. Among them, there was a briefcase that belonged to my brother. With trepidation, I opened it. In addition to the basic equipment, there was also a portable camera. There are 3 videos inside. These 3 videos are all about my brother's experience at that time. After watching them, we couldn't calm down for a long time. The first video was on a certain ice layer. There was a lot of noise, and all the members of the scientific expedition team looked at the sky together. The weather was clear and the sky was clear the previous second. The next second was like polar night, and in a blink of an eye, the sky was completely dark. Clouds can still be seen, but it can be clearly distinguished that there is a huge thing above the clouds blocking everything. A few minutes later, the thing that blocked the sky and the sun sank visibly with the naked eye. Even on the screen, we can feel the oppressive feeling like the sky falling. This process lasted for a few minutes. Suddenly, it was dawn. The ice surface began to vibrate violently, and at the same time, there was a roar like a god beating a drum. The camera turned, and a terrifying huge wave surged on the sea, rushing towards us. There was no end in sight. The second video recorded the scene of the scientific expedition team entering the ice cave. In the video, my brother dived into the water alone, pointed at the hole in the ice wall, and said excitedly, "After 3 days, this hole appeared again." After that, he went into the cave. What he saw and heard afterwards was similar to what we saw. I don't know if it was because of the damage to the equipment. Part of the video was missing in the middle, and the screen was black. The black screen lasted for half an hour. Afterwards, my brother appeared in the shaking picture. He was very embarrassed and his face was complicated. They shouldn't have come down without permission. I asked them to wait for me in the camp, but they came down without permission. They startled the yin bugs, and when I found them. Speaking of this, my brother's eyes were full of bloodshot and he covered the camera. The third video is the shortest but also the most shocking. The ice cave reflects the red fire, as if you are in a lava world. "Found it, finally found it," my brother's voiceover came out. The camera was aimed at a huge bronze door, like the door of a god, sacred and mysterious. Just one look gave people a feeling of being an ant. As the bronze door slowly opened, from my brother's excited voiceover, I could guess how shocking the things inside were. As the camera got closer, the things in the shadows behind the door were about to be revealed. However, the progress bar reached the end. Does the first video look like a giant ROC entering the water and turning into a cone? After watching 3 videos, Professor Zhang hurriedly asked me to turn back to the first one. I came back to my senses from the gripping video and changed my previous tone. It seems that it really cannot be judged by common sense. Although I didn't see the whole picture from the video, it did look like a huge thing in the sky fell into the Arctic Ocean. It can be seen that Professor Zhang has a great obsession with Kunpeng. Professor Zhang was visibly excited, and the decline that he had just experienced due to the trek was swept away. And I focused on the third video. Bronze door, bronze city. Bronze city grows out of magma. I have a feeling that we are very close to that thing. The discovery in the video is like a shot of chicken blood for us, and we are more determined to move forward. The inside of the ice cave cavity is larger than I thought. Except for the broken ice wall, we spent some time to clear the ice that blocked the road. Everything else went smoothly, but just when we were secretly happy, reality poured a basin of cold water on us. There are 2 forks in the road ahead. There are 2 channels on the left and right. Professor Zhang rushed to the left road unexpectedly. Not good. I suddenly thought of something and my face changed suddenly. Lao Dao, stop him. Although Lao Dao reacted immediately, he was still a step slower because he was carrying equipment. Boom. A dull explosion sound came, and the top of the left channel was broken and collapsed instantly, blocking the road. I looked grim. "Professor, what are you doing? The road to the right is a dead end. You should go back quickly." Professor Zhang's voice came through the ice. "The road behind is too dangerous. I don't want you to die here. I, an old man, won't live long. I have to go see Kunpeng in person." The subtle smell of gunpowder floated in the air. I said in a deep voice, "Professor, do you know something?" After waiting for a long time, the professor didn't reply. It was obvious that he had left. Lao Dao tried a few times and shook his head. "The ice is too thick to dig. If it is blasted, it will easily cause a secondary collapse. Then there is only this way left." I looked at the passage on the right and exhaled a breath of turbid air. Dead end. I want to try it too. Lao Dao walked in front as always. "Boss, you and I are 5 meters apart. In case of danger, you have a better chance to leave." I gritted my teeth. "Lao Dao. The big boss hasn't been found yet, boss. You have more important things to do." Lao Dao had no expression on his face and a firm tone. I finally nodded. With a nervous mood, we walked into the right passage, and the journey was surprisingly smooth. But when we were almost at the end of the road, we heard a scream. Professor Zhang's scream. A cliff appeared in front of us. We walked out of the passage and were already on the opposite side of the cliff, while Professor Zhang was still on the other side of the cliff. Professor Zhang was hanging on the edge of the cliff, with a scarlet patch on his left shoulder and blood dripping continuously. When he saw us, he was startled, and then he smiled bitterly. "I didn't expect that your way was the right one." Lao Dao looked at me, and I nodded slightly. He immediately used a nail gun to shoot the rope to the opposite ice wall, and climbed over along the rope. Professor Zhang screamed again, his left hand slipped out of his hand, and he almost fell. Only one hand was holding the edge of the cliff tightly. "Professor, hold on, I'll save you right away," I shouted. "Since you have all come this far, it seems that you are determined to die." Professor Zhang took something out of his pocket with his left hand with difficulty. "This is for you, I can't walk anymore." After that, he threw the thing in his hand to Lao Dao. "Hold on, Professor, Lao Dao is coming." I realized that something was wrong. Crack. The edge of the cliff cracked, and Professor Zhang fell into the abyss. Only his voice echoed for a long time. "If you see that strange creature, remember to tell me about it in front of my grave." I frowned and remained silent. Lao Dao returned the same way and handed me the thing in his hand, which was a map. "It's made of cowhide and looks a bit old." I checked and found that the route we took in the ice cave was actually recorded on it. At the fork in the road on the map, a skull was drawn on the right channel, and there was nothing on the left. "Boss, can you believe it?" Lao Dao said in a deep voice. "Zhang Songtao was misled and lost his life. According to the record on the map, we have walked 3/4 of the way. The end point is marked by a red dot. If Professor Zhang was still alive, he might be able to ask for some information, but it seems that he can't do it now." Cough cough, a fishy smell came out of my throat, and I quickly covered my mouth. When I took my hand away, there were traces of blood on my palm. "Boss." Lao Dao looked concerned. "Time is running out." I wiped off the blood, looked at the map, and looked forward. There is only one road ahead anyway. Lao Dao understood, no need to say more. Facts have proved that persistence is right. More than an hour later, Lao Dao's deep voice was a little excited. "Boss, come quickly." I walked up quickly, and the crystal ice reflected a gorgeous bright red. Red like magma. When I reached the end of the road, I was stunned for a moment. The heat wave hit me. In front of me was like a giant bowl made of ice, containing a large amount of magma, and in the center of this magma, there was a bronze city, standing quietly. The ice didn't melt. Lao Dao was surprised. "Strange." I frowned. "What's going on?" Just then, Lao Dao found a copper-green deep well not far away. He walked closer to check and found that it was an underground passage. To be precise, it was a passage through the magma. Judging from the general direction, the passage connects to the bronze city. Lao Dao jumped down first. Boom! At the moment of contact with the ground of the passage, a sharp noise suddenly came out. The ice surface under my feet suddenly vibrated, and I looked at the magma suddenly. My pupils trembled. They were wriggling. This is not magma, but countless yin-embracing bugs. Go! I jumped down the passage in a hurry. It's a group of yin-embracing bugs. Lao Dao immediately drew out his weapon. "Boss, I'll cover the rear." Densely packed yin-embracing bugs crawled into the passage, and I ran as hard as I could in front. Although Lao Dao was delaying behind, there were more and more yin-embracing bugs, and the distance was getting closer. Seeing that the group of yin-embracing bugs was about to pounce on Lao Dao, I quickly took out the micro-explosives from my bag and threw them out. Lao Dao, retreat quickly. Boom! The passage collapsed instantly, and ice chips splashed everywhere. Fortunately, there was a thick layer of ice outside the bronze passage, and the collapsed debris blocked the group of yin-embracing bugs. Lao Dao stood up and shook off the ice debris on his body. Just as he was about to continue to explore the way forward, he suddenly heard a rustling sound behind him. The big ice block blocking the passage was shaking. It was about to be washed away. Lao Dao hurriedly went up to hold it, and it was slightly stable. "Boss, you go first, I'll hold it here." "You can't hold it for long. I made a decision, let's go together." More and more yin-embracing bugs poured into the passage, and the combined force was unimaginable. "It will be too late if you don't leave now." Lao Dao shouted loudly. "What your father didn't do may now be completed by you brothers, and hope is right in front of you. You are carrying the responsibility of the Zhang family. Don't hesitate. Go quickly." The voice was like a huge bell, going straight into my mind. I gritted my teeth, turned around and left. The wind was left behind me. I kept running forward. I didn't look back. I didn't dare to look back. The gate of the bronze city was open. I walked in without hesitation. The long bronze walkway connected the inner hall at the end. On both sides, there were various statues. These statues were lifelike, all creatures in myths and legends. There was Nuo with a human head and a snake body. There was the Queen Mother of the West with a leopard tail and tiger teeth. There was Shannon with a human body and a cow head, and there were also Kunpeng and Jialong. I knew that I came to the right place. I told Professor Zhang before that my ancestors had historians, but I didn't tell him that my ancestor Shang Wuming was the head of the Shanhai division under the jurisdiction of the Grand Historian during the Qin Shuang period. The Grand Historian was mainly responsible for compiling historical books and astronomical calendars. At the same time, at the request of the first emperor, he explored rivers and mountains. Shanhai Division is a secret organization responsible for geographical exploration. At that time, my ancestor led a team to explore various parts of China and found many hidden stories, all of which were recorded in the Shanhai Record. Later, the ancestor followed the order of the first emperor and went to the far north, which is now the North Pole. Here, they met with an unexpected event. In the end, only the ancestor went back alone. Not long after, he burned the first 5 volumes of Shanhai Lu and burned himself at home. Only the last words were left. In the far North Sea, there is a bronze city. I entered it and was lucky to see the truth of heaven and earth. I was afraid, so I fled. However, although I escaped by chance, I was cursed with an extremely evil curse, which ended with death. The general meaning is that after the ancestor entered the bronze city, he saw the truth of the world and was extremely frightened, so he escaped. However, although he successfully left, he was cursed. In order to remove the curse, he ended it with his own death. But what he didn't know was that the so-called curse did not end, but was inherited by his descendants. Since then, our descendants have never lived past the age of 25. Even if they are healthy, they will die suddenly at the age of 25. The mission of each of our generations is to go to the North Pole, find the so-called Bronze City, and find something to break the curse. It was passed down to our generation. My brother did it, and so did I. My brother and I are the same age. He is 3 months older than me, and we both turned 25 this year. If we don't find a way to break the curse, the end is coming. My coughing up blood is already a sign. As for Shanhai Lu, except for the 5 volumes that were burned, there are 11 volumes of fragments left, which became the Dakinyu Wenlu that has been passed down. My brother once showed 1 volume to Professor Zhang. Unknowingly, the road has come to the end. Inner hall, we have arrived. The damage to the inner hall was very serious. The walls around were mottled, and the original patterns were blurred. It was obvious that someone had deliberately destroyed it. Judging from the traces, it was a few years old. Could these destroyed things be the truth that our ancestors had seen? Perhaps. Everything was unknown. In the center of the inner hall, there was a 4-legged bronze tripod. The pattern on the tripod was Kunpeng mating, forming an approximate circle. I walked over slowly, and there was a ball of meat like white jade in the tripod, crystal clear, mellow and tempting. There seemed to be a voice in my mind, constantly urging, "Eat it. Eat it." Is this the introduction to breaking the curse? I swallowed my saliva and slowly grabbed the ball of magical meat. It was smooth and cool. "Shangpei, don't move." Suddenly, an old voice came from behind me. I turned my head abruptly and opened my eyes wide. "Professor Zhang, it's me." Professor Zhang held a gun in his hand, pointing the gun at me. I was surprised. "Professor, aren't you dead?" "There is water under that cliff." I explored it in advance. Professor Zhang narrowed his eyes slightly. "Thank you for finding the way for me. Otherwise I might have been trapped in the bronze passage." "Did you see Lao Dao?" I couldn't help asking. "It's probably eaten by the yin-bearing bug." Professor Zhang gloated. "Fortunately, the gap in the passage is not big. If it was farther away, I might have alarmed those bugs if I jumped over." "Are you looking for Kunpeng here?" I looked gloomy and stared at him. "Looking for Kunpeng? Where do you think this is?" Professor Zhang looked at the miraculous meat, not hiding his desire. "It's in Kunpeng's stomach. Hurry up and give me the Kunpeng meat, otherwise, you'll be in trouble." I looked at the thing in my hand. Kunpeng meat. That's right. Legend has it that eating it will cure all diseases and make you immortal. Professor Zhang's face was ruddy. 10 years ago, I came to the North Pole and found traces of Kunpeng. Unfortunately, I only got the picture, but I didn't understand it. Until 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with advanced liver cancer. If I wanted to survive, I had to pin my hopes on the illusory miracle. Pause at that moment, he changed his tone. "Later, I met your brother. In your family's Dakinyu Wenlu, I learned that there was a Kunpeng meat, that was comparable to the immortal medicine, which gave me hope of survival. Others may think it's fake, but I know that Kunpeng exists. I laughed angrily. So, you have been using my brother. Where did he go, now that you haven't seen him? Don't you have the answer in your heart? Professor Zhang shot at my feet and smiled grimly. Bring the thing here, otherwise, the next shot will be your head. Okay, I'll give it to you. I took a deep breath, picked up the Kunpeng meat and walked over. Professor Zhang was very excited. Just as I was about to hand it to him, I sank down and hooked my legs towards his lower body. Looking for death, Professor Zhang lost his balance and fell, and the pistol fell out of his hand. I seized the opportunity and rushed over quickly. Bang! A sharp gunshot echoed throughout the inner hall. My thighs went numb instantly and I fell heavily to the ground. I don't have only one gun. Professor Zhang walked over with a grin, and the warm muzzle of the gun pressed against my forehead. Why don't you struggle? Ha! An unprecedented sense of weakness filled my body. Damn. My body is out of control. Professor Zhang's face was grim, and he pulled the trigger. Go to hell, puff. Blood splashed on my face. Professor Zhang's pupils dilated, his face full of disbelief. And he fell straight down. The bullet passed through my ear, and my ears buzzed. I looked at the young man behind Professor Zhang in shock. His temperament was as cold as a knife. That face, I couldn't be more familiar with it. My brother, Zhang, brother, you. The man in front of me was a little strange to me. Why are you dressed like this? He was wearing a black awning, covering his entire body, leaving only his face exposed. He paused after hearing what I said, but didn't reply. Instead, he walked in front of me and kicked the piece of Kunpeng flesh on the ground aside. Just as I was about to speak, I saw the kicked-away Kunpeng flesh turned into a ball of black powder and disappeared without a trace. Is this fake? I approached with difficulty, but there was nothing but a pile of powder. Really, it's this. My brother pressed his hand on the pattern of the bronze tripod, and a moment later, a high platform rose in front of it. On the high platform, there was a bronze coffin, he said calmly. The piece of Kunpeng flesh inside is for you. Looking at the coffin, I couldn't help but walk up and push open the coffin lid. Inside was a corpse wrapped in black cloth. The coffin was not big, and the body was curled up and didn't fit, obviously put in later. And on the side of the body was the real Kunpeng flesh. I didn't go to get it immediately, but turned to look at Zhang and said in a deep voice, "You are not my brother." "Right." Zhang walked up to me with a blank expression. "You talk too much. Where is my brother?" I took out Professor Zhang's pistol that I had quietly hidden on my body just now. Speak. This fake guy looked calm, with no ripples in his eyes. After a moment, he looked away and looked at the coffin. As expected, my heart suddenly twitched. At this moment of distraction, he covered the muzzle of the gun and rushed forward. I pulled the trigger and shot through his palm, but his expression remained unchanged, and he tapped my head several times quickly. You. I collapsed all over. The man grabbed Kunpeng's flesh and forced it into my mouth, asking me to swallow it. Although I still couldn't use my strength, I could feel that the weakness in my body due to the curse was gradually fading. Even the gunshot wound on my leg was slowly healing. I held the bronze coffin with difficulty and peeled off the black cloth on the body. The body was charred, but the face was my brother Zhang. My head was buzzing, and I heard a man's calm voice. Before he died, he told me not to blame myself. I fell to the ground and opened my mouth, but I couldn't speak. My vision gradually blurred. When I opened my eyes again, I was already at the Kunpeng station. Seeing this, Lao Dao, who was guarding the bed, pulled out an ugly smile on his resolute face. "Boss, wake up." "Lao Dao, you." I suddenly wrinkled my nose. What a strong smell. Why is it so similar to the smell on Wang Dao? Lao Dao said in a muffled voice, "Boss, we were expelled from the body by that thing." My face was distorted. "Boss, don't worry. Yumo said that this smell will disappear in half a month." I asked in confusion. "Who is Yumo?" Lao Dao told me not to worry and told me what happened. It turned out that not long after I left that day, in less than 2 minutes, the group of yin holding bugs broke through the obstacles, and Yumo saved Lao Dao at the moment when he was about to drown him. Yumo is the person who pretended to be my brother. According to Lao Dao's description, Yumo is very familiar with Kunpeng's body, and we can get out thanks to him. At this point, Lao Dao whispered, "This Yumo is not immortal." "What do you mean?" I frowned. Lao Dao explained. When he saved me, he rushed out of the group of yin holding bugs and had burns on his body. But I observed that the burns on his body were healing at a very fast speed. The healing can be seen with the naked eye. I murmured, such a strong vitality, he is indeed not a mortal. No wonder he dared to block the muzzle of the gun with his hand at that time. For some reason, the broken ice wall that blocked the road before suddenly appeared in my mind. Now thinking back, there seems to be a human-shaped depression on the ice wall. Could it be him? He looks too much like the big boss. Lao Dao couldn't help looking at the body bag next to him. If I hadn't watched the big boss grow up and knew his skills, I might have made a mistake. The corners of my eyes were red, and I didn't want to look anymore. In the body bag, there was my brother's body. He died of yin holding bugs. In the following days, Lao Dao and I tried to find Yumo, but to no avail. In desperation, we had to return. I did not report the Kunpeng incident to my superiors. They just attributed everything to an accident, where the expedition team was trapped in an ice cave, lost in it, and died. As for the Kunpeng under the sea, during my coma, it had already turned into a peng and soared into the sky. Although other members of the Arctic Expedition Station witnessed the huge waves on the sea and the magnificent scene that covered the sky and the sun at that time, they could not explain why. It was impossible to get a glimpse of the whole picture. The satellites in space were disturbed at that moment and did not capture anything at all. Because of swallowing Kunpeng's flesh, my physical fitness is much better than before. I have done an experiment. A small cut on my hand will be completely healed in about a day, and there will be no scars left. Originally, I thought that Yumo also had super recovery ability because he swallowed Kunpeng's flesh, but obviously, I was wrong. According to Lao Dao's description, Yumo's recovery ability is much stronger than mine. They are not in the same league at all. Who is he? Why does he look so much like my brother? Bronze City would not be naturally generated in Kunpeng's stomach. It must have been built by someone. Judging from the shape, it looks like a product of Chinese civilization, but I can't find the corresponding dynasty. It's so strange. I knelt in front of my brother's grave, burned incense for him, and kowed out heavily. Brother, have a good journey. When you get down there, tell our business ancestors that the curse that has trapped us for 2,000 years has been broken. Lao Dao then burned incense. After the matter was over, he said to me, Boss, I checked it out. You guessed right. The big boss deliberately let Zhang Songtao see the Great Qin's strange stories at that time. Long before they met, the big boss knew that Zhang Songtao had a map. The big boss is my brother. Lao Dao used to follow my father. After my father died early, my brother took over the shop. It was not until 3 years ago that it was handed over to me. I understand. My brother has always been meticulous and would never make such a low-level mistake. He even had a plan in mind, and contacting Zhang Songtao was actually paving the way for me, his younger brother. At that time, we were in the ice cave, and Zhang Songtao guided us intentionally or unintentionally, and we took the safe routes on the map. It was equivalent to finding a guide for me. Lao Dao, let's go back to the shop, I sighed and turned away. While driving, Lao Dao asked curiously, Boss, why did you leave a recorder around the Kunpeng station before you came back? I smiled and looked into the distance. I'm betting to see if I can find a new guy. 3 months later, a strange customer came to my shop. It was Yumo. His temperament was still cold, and he said straight to the point, I want to cooperate with you. To cooperate, you must show some sincerity. I waved my hand, signaling Lao Dao to close the door. Yumo took out a bronze hollow sphere, which looked like a ghost ball with only one layer left. This is the second thing in the bronze coffin besides Kunpeng's flesh. I asked, what is this? You don't need to know. Yumo said calmly, but I can tell you that there are 72 places like Bronze City in the world. Shan Lu guessed that the contents of the first 5 volumes of your family's Shen Hai Lu that were burned were related to these 72 places. I smiled. Sure enough, my brother told you a lot of things. You two brothers are very smart. Yumo did not comment. Shan Lu calculated at the time that I would come to you, and he believed you enough. I suddenly said, there is an ice wall in Kunpeng's body, and the human-shaped depression on it was left by you. Yumo admitted, Shang Lu broke a hole in the ice wall, and I successfully escaped. Hearing this, I began to look at the hollow sphere without saying anything. In fact, the recorder left that day did not contain much content, mainly seeking cooperation and mutual benefit. The first time I saw the coffin, I judged from the subtle traces that there was something else in it besides Kunpeng's flesh, which had been taken away. I was betting that Yumo had just revived after being frozen, that he didn't understand the present world, that he needed to find something, and that he had been observing me. Unexpectedly, I won the bet. After a long time, I said, "What do you need me to do?" "Provide me an identity and collect information." Yumo said, "The remaining 71 lost places should be of interest to you if you want to complete the Shanghai Lu. You come with me, and I will help you clear all dangers and obstacles on the road." He looked at the bronze hollow ball. "I only want this thing from the other lost places. In other words, there are 72 of those hollow balls. Deal." I agreed immediately and arranged. "You will settle down in my antique shop as a shop assistant in the future." "Okay." Double quotes. Yumo nodded. After speaking, he fell into silence again. Finally, I found a topic to talk about, and asked curiously, "What era is the Bronze City from, Yu Dynasty?" I was shocked when I heard that, 8,000 years ago, before the Xia Dynasty, the Yu Dynasty where Yu Shun lived. You know, the archaeological community now has almost no relevant historical materials about the Yu Dynasty. It was only in recent years that 16 ancient characters were discovered at the Dadiwan site in Jiangsu. The archaeological experts did not say absolutely, but only said that it was suspected to be a product of the Yu Dynasty. Yumo did not deny it. I then asked, "There are only myths and legends about that era now. What kind of era was it? An unparalleled glorious era?" Yumo looked nostalgic, his expression solemn and solemn. All races came to pay tribute, and it was extremely powerful. Hearing this, I had a question. If it was so powerful, why did it still perish? "I don't know." Yumo shook his head and put the bronze hollow ball into his pocket. "So, I'm looking for the truth." I understood and smiled and stretched out my hand. Happy cooperation. Yumo didn't stretch out his hand, but nodded. I naturally took my hand back and looked at the Daqin Yuwen Lu on the table, and suddenly I felt a little excited. How long will it take to turn you into Shanghai Lu? The end.